you can only get pregnant on ovulation day. True or false?
That one is false.
So we know that a short luteal phase can impede conception, and that's because of the role of progesterone.
If you're someone who's been trying for a long period of time, I'd say ditch the apps.
Ovulation is probably the most misunderstood part of the cycle.
If you're trying to conceive, this one window matters more than anything. I'm Gail Madalena, a registered nutritional therapist with over 8 years specialised experience in fertility and preconception health.
Fertility is all about timing, and most people are working with the wrong assumptions. My name's Thalia Pellegrini. I'm a registered nutritional therapist specialising in women's hormonal health, and I've got more than 15 years experience. Ovulation is probably the most misunderstood part of the cycle.
Absolutely.
So let's break it down and explain exactly what goes on.
Yes, so our menstrual cycle is kind of classified as two different sections. You know, in the first part, pre-ovulation, you've got the follicular phase. Now this is where your immature follicles in the ovaries are maturing. And when you get to the point of ovulation, you will have a surge of something called LH. And this is where the more dominant egg will ovulate. Once this has happened, you then move into your luteal phase, which is the second half. And this is really important when we're thinking about conception. You know, luteal phase is where progesterone is dominant, which is a key hormone to support the lining of your uterus, to help with implantation, but also to maintain a pregnancy. So it's really, really important to have a balance and for these two parts of your cycle to be functioning optimally.
So we'll talk more about luteal phase later because it's so important. And actually what we see a lot clinically is that different length of luteal phase, which is really normal. So length variation is perfectly normal. And we'll talk about how to optimize that luteal phase. But definitely when we think about the whole cycle, there are certain nutrients we need to optimize a healthy menstrual cycle.
Absolutely. And you know, we want to be having a balanced diet, so we're getting good diversity of these nutrients. But key things to focus on are things like B6, which is fantastic for hormone balance and modulation. You know, making sure that levels of progesterone and estrogen are optimal. Also things like zinc, really important for ovulation. You also want to think about your B vitamins, specifically things like folate and choline, which are really, really important for that early fetal development in pregnancy.
Absolutely. And that's why we always recommend if you're trying to conceive, always think about a specifically designed preconceptual multi-nutrient, which will be different to a standard multi.
Absolutely. You know, a fertility specific multi is going to be higher in certain nutrients like folic acid. You know, it's also more targeted to support things like egg health, you know, hormonal health, ovulation, which are all fundamentally important for preconception. Also, a multi is really there to plug any gaps from a diet. You know, you might not be getting all of these key nutrients in enough levels and quantities to really support the foundations of preconception.
Yeah, and those are all the nutrients that sit at the core of our fertility support for women.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the best ways to track ovulation.
Yeah.
Okay, so the key one, the big one, shining lights is?
Well, I think most people will obviously know about ovulation sticks. You know, that is a dipstick in urine that tests for LH. And that's that surge hormone that promotes ovulation to occur. And that typically will happen about 12 to 24 hours before ovulation actually happens. So it's a really good indicator that it's coming, and that's a great time to time having intercourse.
Yeah.
But you know, there are lots of other ways to establish
what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
What your body's
ovulation.
doing. So in terms of what the body's doing and that you can see, the key one is cervical mucus.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is one that once you tune into it, you really can start to identify it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but in my youth, I never knew what it was. I didn't know, and it does change throughout your cycle. You know, typically after your period, you're much drier, and as you move closer to ovulation, it will go to a more creamy consistency. And then just before ovulation is that kind of clear egg white consistency. Yeah. And that's what we're really looking for as a clear clue that ovulation is about to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And other ways you can track your ovulation include taking your temperature.
Yes. This one's a bit more challenging. It's, you know, you really have to make sure you're doing it first thing in the morning. So very easy to forget if you're in a rush. It's also quite variable. You know, if you are sick or you haven't had a great night's sleep, it can feed into it. But this coupled with, you know, tracking apps, for instance, can be a really good way to pinpoint ovulation. It gives you a bit more data and a bit more information to look at what's going on cycle to cycle.
I think you mentioned apps there, which is really useful. And I think so many women use apps to track their cycle. And what we always say in clinic is that apps predict, but bodies confirm. So if you're new to an app, there's not that much data in there that you've recorded so far. So just be aware that it may not be 100% accurate. So really tuning into your body and paying attention to what your body is telling you is probably arguably as valuable or more valuable than
100%. I think the key thing with the apps is it's an algorithm, you know, it's using past data. So the more data you give it, the more accurate it will become, but it's never 100% accurate. So it can give you an idea, an indication, and if you're using it alongside things like your cervical mucus, for instance, that can be a really useful tool. I'd also say there's a danger with apps to become too obsessive. It can really take over, you know, your life and dictate, you know, what's going on in terms of your fertility journey. So if you're someone who's been trying for a long period of time, I'd say ditch the apps. If you know your cycle, then it's much better to kind of put that to one side, because it can become a bit overbearing, it can add stress, and it can also add a lot of stress to your partner as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually can be really useful, but it's so valuable to tune in as a woman to what your cycle is doing. And just being aware of it, because your cycle will not be the same every month. Not every woman has a 28-day cycle, or there might be a difference of a couple of days each month, and that's going to affect ovulation. So actually things like that cervical mucus signs are so important to tune into.
Yeah, and I think a lot of women will also get, you know, some twinges, some light pain, cramping, very normal. And that's also another sign that you're ovulating. So there are definitely subtle things when you're looking that you can tune into.
So we often get asked, if I've got, say, a 26 or 28-day cycle, when should I expect to be ovulating?
Yeah, it is a really good question. And I think, as we've mentioned, it's highly variable. Really, we want to be ovulating somewhere at the midpoint. So if we've got, you know, a 28-day cycle, then we're hoping somewhere around day 14, day 15. If you've got a slightly longer cycle, you know, something like 32 days, then, you know, it moves just a little bit. So day 16, day 17. As long as it's somewhere in that midpoint and your luteal phase, so day of ovulation up to the day your cycle, your period begins, as long as that's over 10 days, then that would still be in the realms of being a normal cycle and consistent for fertility.
So if we, as we've just discussed, the time in the month when we are most fertile is around the middle. So depending on the length of cycle, probably somewhere between 14 and 16 days. But there are other considerations and variations to that, which just complicates things a little bit. So that would probably be how long your period is, for example, and a few other things as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, the key thing is your cycle length. You know, if you're someone who's got a very short cycle, so 22 days, for instance, you may be ovulating at day 10. And if you think the lifespan of sperm is about 5 days, if you're having sex, you know, very shortly after your period, during your period even, then you could get pregnant, you know, right off the bat of having your period. But that's quite a small minority of people. You know, most people, it's about 2 weeks after they've had their period.
So in consultations, we're often asked, when is the best time to have sex if I'm trying to get pregnant?
Yeah. Probably one of the most asked questions. And I think, again, obviously, once we've identified ovulation, which we've spoken about, really, we're looking at the kind of 4 days prior and the day of ovulation as our peak fertile window. As mentioned, you know, sperm, typically healthy sperm, will live up to 5 days. And if you've got really good cervical mucus as the woman, that can mean that has a higher chance of getting to the egg alive and functioning. So really, you're looking at those 4 days prior and the day of ovulation. I would say that, you know, the day before is your optimal peak day. You really want the sperm to be up there waiting when that egg matures and ovulates.
So in consultations, one of the key things we're going to ask a woman is, when we're looking at her menstrual cycle, is how long is her luteal phase? So we know that a short luteal phase can impede conception. And that's because of the role of progesterone.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how important progesterone is for a healthy menstrual cycle and when we're trying to conceive.
I mean, it's fundamental. It's the hormone, really. Whilst others play a role, progesterone is the key driving factor of thickening the uterine lining and really providing that environment that's supportive of implantation and also supportive of maintaining a pregnancy. If someone's going on to have multiple miscarriages and early miscarriages, I would especially be looking at progesterone levels and making sure that that's sufficient. And when it comes to luteal phases, we touched on ideally being longer than 10 days. So anything shorter than 10 days, again, I would be worried that progesterone might be the driving factor.
So when we're looking for indications from menstrual cycle that progesterone might be a little low, one of the key ones for us would be spotting for your period.
Yes.
So if you're spotting for your period starts, that maybe an indication that your progesterone is a little low at the end of your cycle, and that might have implications if you're trying to conceive.
Yes, absolutely. That is a fundamental one. And also, irregular cycles and changes, variability in cycle length can also be a factor of low progesterone as well.
So we talked a little bit earlier about nutrients that support that luteal phase. So the key one that I always go to is vitamin C. So we know that vitamin C can be really helpful for supporting that progesterone in the second half of your cycle.
Yeah.
So from a dietary perspective, that is, fresh fruits and vegetables, lots of antioxidants.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons that vitamin C is key in a preconceptual multi.
Yes, absolutely. And alongside, progesterone, whilst it is very important and the hormone we're really looking at, you do also have to factor in estrogen levels as well throughout your cycle, because it's also that ratio, looking at the balance between estrogen and progesterone. So still thinking about nutrients like B6, which is going to modulate the two. We still want to be supporting things like our energy metabolism, so our B vitamins, things like choline, still really important. So it's not any one thing in isolation.
And it's not just about, we always say food first, it's not just about your supplements. So in terms of food, we've meant, fruit and vegetables for your vitamin C, whole grains for your B vitamins.
Yeah, nuts and seeds.
Absolutely.
Green leafy veg, really important.
So that the foundation is your healthy diet and making sure you're getting all those nutrients where you can through your food.
Yeah, but I think, we're all human and you can't have a balanced diet 100% of the time. And that is where a preconception supplement really supports and can just aid alongside what you're eating.
So the fertility support for women has all those nutrients, really targeting that healthy menstrual cycle across the whole cycle, including the luteal phase.
Yeah, 100%.
We hear a lot of myths about trying to conceive in consultations. What's the one you hear most?
I mean, there are a few, but I'd say definitely, do I ovulate on day 14? Because that's what the GPs will say, day 14, day 14. The answer is no, that is a myth. Women are hugely individual and variable, so absolutely not. It can be individual to that person.
So I get asked a lot, you can't get pregnant on your period, isn't that right? And this is a tricky one because it's really unlikely, but theoretically you could if your cycle is short, you ovulate very early, and you have quite a long bleed. So if all of these things are in perfect combination, you could, but it's really rare.
Very rare, but you're right. There could be someone out there that has.
What about regular cycles mean perfect timing? I hear that a lot.
Yes. Now, having a very, very similar cycle length each month is great. That's a really healthy sign. But actually what we want to know is, are you ovulating and how long is that luteal phase? Because you might be having a 28-day cycle, but if you're ovulating on day 21, 22 or much later in your cycle, that's not ideal for fertility.
And you can only get pregnant on ovulation day. True or false?
That one is false. There is our fertile window, and really it's that 5-day period. So 4 days pre-ovulation and then the day of ovulation.
So to wrap up this segment, what we'd really love you to take away is the fact that there's no such thing as a perfect cycle. And also tuning into your body is very important so you can understand what your body is telling you. And that's going to really help optimize your chances of conception.
We speak to over 1,200 women a month. So we're also here for you, and you can book a free consultation via our website at wildnutrition.com. In our next episode, we're going to get into the gritty details of laying the foundations for preconception.